Welcome to the Plagues Project.
10 Plagues, Many Angles.
Now more than ever.
Come learn with us.
Of all the 10 plagues, Marc Chagall only depicted one of them in his artwork: Moses ordering the plague of darkness over Egypt. Maybe Chagall was most interested in this plague because, for an artist, darkness is not just the absence of light. Rather, it has texture and substance and layers. Likewise, it seems, the darkness of Egypt was not just the absence of light, but something much deeper and more complex. The ninth plague, known as Makat Choshech, or the plague of darkness, is described to us in just 3 verses. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Nateh yadcha al hashamayim, vayhi choshech al eretz Mitzrayim, vayamesh choshech. The Lord said to Moses, "Hold out your arm toward the sky, that there may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched." Vayet Moshe et yado al hashamayim, vayhi choshech afela bechol eretz Mitzrayim shloshet yamim. Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. Lo ra'u ish et achiv, v'lo kamu ish mitachtav, shloshet yamim. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one could get up from where he was. U'lechol b'nei Yisrael haya or b'moshvotam. But all the Israelites had light in their dwellings. It is generally understood that the plagues, from the 1st to the 10th, progressively intensify in ascending order of severity, ultimately culminating with the 10th plague, the worst, the death of the firstborn. Yet many scholars are puzzled by what seems to be an anticlimactic 9th plague, the penultimate plague. Compared to the other plagues, there seems to be no explicit destructive effect of darkness. It doesn't seem to afflict the Egyptians' bodies or to threaten their water or food supply. It seems much milder, less severe, in comparison to the devastating impact of the other plagues. So, traditional commentators have always looked deeper and closer into the words of the text to reveal the actual physical suffering that was contained in the darkness, making it much more severe than it appears in the first reading. One line of interpretation focuses on the 2 words, vayamesh choshech, which can be translated as a palpable, touchable, feelable darkness. This was not just the darkness caused by a lack of light, but a thick, tangible darkness of either sand or smoke. The Ralbag suggests that the darkness was a supernaturally thick fog that invaded the Egyptians' homes. It was so toxic that breathing it could cause death. They desperately covered their noses and mouths, petrified even to breathe. The Egyptians either met with a miserable end or lived in terror of being swallowed up by the fog. On the morning of 9/11, artist Michael Mulhern watched the Twin Towers fall from his nearby studio. His windows shattered, and smoke and debris filled his home studio of more than 30 years. He put on the respirator and goggles that he wore while working with aluminum paint, which came in handy as the air quality worsened when he evacuated his studio and walked away from the disaster site. Months later, when he finally was able to return to his studio, the dust and dirt from the World Trade Center covered his art supplies and paints. These and other paintings, part of a series titled Ash Road, and displayed at the 9/11 Memorial Museum were created by Mulhern by using these contaminated paints and dirty canvases to symbolize the chaos and dislocation of this period. Other commentators focus on the second half of the verse. Lo ra'u ish et achiv, v'lo kamu ish mitachtav. That the people could not see each other or leave their place, which they interpret to mean that the Egyptians actually lost sight and mobility in this plague, that they became blind and lame, a cursed pairing that appears frequently in the Bible. They had eyes but could not see. They had legs but could not move. The suffering of the blind and the lame make up a better part of Picasso's blue period between 1901 and 1904, when he painted essentially monochromatic paintings in dark shades of blue. Like in our story, for Picasso, blindness, disability, darkness, and despair are all intimately connected. Contemporary interpretations of the plague of darkness emphasize not its physical implications, but its psychological and social implications. People could not see each other or leave their place. They were alone, in isolation, in a kind of solitary confinement. Of course, withdrawal and despair are common symptoms resulting from long-term isolation. Notably, the title of William Styron's memorial of his clinical depression is entitled Darkness Visible. Ernest Jerome de France made these dark sketches while incarcerated in the California prison system, where he spent extended periods of time in solitary confinement. The loops and swirls reflect a maddening existence, deprived of relationship and light, unable to communicate or to perceive time. The Torah tells us that the plague lasted 3 days, but the Egyptians themselves couldn't distinguish day from night. So they had no idea how much time had passed or how much time it would last. They were deprived of the basic human need to mark time. The plague of darkness dismantled the light of creation. The Egyptians experienced the pre-creation darkness, the void and the chaos of tohu vavohu, before any separation of light and dark. The last phrase of this plague tells us, Ulechol b'nei Yisrael haya or b'moshvotam. The Israelites had light where they dwelled. In this illuminated Rylands Haggadah from 14th century Spain, we see a depiction of this parallel experience. Only when Egypt is darkened, the Israelites can experience light. The darkening of Egypt allowed them to see. The darkening of Egypt allowed the slaves to see the light, so to speak, for the first time. It marked their first taste of freedom. The Israelites also experienced, for the first time, being unseen or invisible, which in and of itself must have been liberating. In 1915, Kazimir Malevich first shared his most famous work, simply entitled The Black Square, which is considered a centerpiece of modern art. X-rays have revealed that beneath the dark color, there are actually 2 underlying images and an inscription. The thickness of the layers is evident in that the painting has now started to peel and has become full of cracks over time. Malevich's Black abstraction was revived by a number of American artists in the aftermath of World War II. Ad Reinhardt, for example, created his Black paintings by mixing black oil paint with small amounts of red, green, or blue, and allowed the painting to sit for several weeks in order to separate the pigment from the solvent. He would then pour out the solvent and use the remaining concentrated paint to apply a completely smooth, matte surface that left no trace of the artist's brush. Like Malevich, the seemingly pitch blackness actually had many layers and colors beneath it. The simplicity and non-representational character of Black paintings, of darkness, challenges and invites the viewer to meditate and reflect on what he or she sees about himself or herself in the dark void or emptiness. Reinhardt once summed up the power of abstraction in a cartoon. A gallery viewer mocks a painting on the wall. Ha ha, what does this represent? The canvas, coming to life, angrily answers, what do you represent? I hope that these texts and images leave us all with thought-provoking questions that are relevant to our own lives and especially in today's reality. How do we incorporate darkness into our own self-expression and creativity? How do we mark time and maintain connections in a time of isolation and confinement? What do we see more clearly now because of the darkness? How does blocking some things shine a light on other things? How are we different when we are less seen? Is being invisible liberating? What are things that you know are present, but are still not visible? What do we learn about ourselves when we are forced to stare into the darkness? What light do we personally create and contribute to our world?